Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back, man. Got another great video for you guys today, as usual. You guys know the deal on this channel. It's all about setting the record straight, stopping the lies, stopping the narrative, stopping them from rewriting the history. And we must hold the standard, guys. And in this video, we're going to talk about Carmelo Anthony, man. And some of the stupid comments that he makes. Carmelo Anthony doesn't seem to understand the history or know the history of the game. These guys, I'm telling you right now, a lot of these NBA players, remember, just because you play in the league doesn't mean that you know the history of the NBA, man. And Carmelo Anthony exposed himself by making some comments about why he would never coach in the NBA. I saw this article from Carmelo Anthony, and he said that he would never coach in the NBA, or he could never coach in the NBA. And he said something about there hasn't been any great player that's ever coached and been successful. That's what he said. He said there's never been a great player that's went into coaching and been successful at this. Once again, exposing himself as not knowing the history of the game, because that's a completely false statement, man. These guys are idiots, man. Straight up idiots, man. Carmelo Anthony, man. And he tries to put himself in another realm. We're going to talk about this video, guys. And I want to thank you guys, everyone across the world, everyone across the states that's been supporting my channel. Once again, guys, I am truly humbled as always. You guys continue to humble me. So thank you to all you guys out there, the true, real basketball fans, standing up. Thank you, guys. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, like I said, I want you to do a brief video on Carmelo Anthony, man, and some of these idiotic comments that he made in this article. Now, I've never really been a fan of Carmelo Anthony, but this is not a knock video or a tear down Carmelo Anthony. This has nothing to do with his playing career or anything like that. I want to focus on the comments that he made in reference to why he would never coach in the NBA. Now, I just came across this article. I wasn't searching for this stuff. This stuff just pops up sometimes. And I saw this article, I don't know, from the other day, whenever it was. And they were talking to Carmelo Anthony, and he talked about coaching. And he said he would never coach in the NBA because he don't think he could coach in the NBA. And he made it, he made it seem as if there's never been any great player that's ever become a great coach or been successful as a coach. He literally said that. No great player that's ever went to the sideline and been successful. That's what he says. And once again, Carmelo Anthony, you expose yourself because that's not true. Those are not the facts of the history of the NBA, guys. Once again, do your research. Do your homework, Carmelo Anthony, before you make nonsensical statements, a blanket statement like that. There's never been a superstar player or a great player that's went to the sidelines and been successful. What are we counting as successful? Winning championships or just having your team competitive? Because there have been many of great players that become coaches that have been successful, right? And I looked into some of this stuff. And like I said, guys, a lot of this stuff I do off the top of my head, and I just do a quick look into the history books. And I said I pulled these things up, man, because I knew that was a dumb statement. I knew right off the bat that didn't make any sense. There have been many great players that have become successful coaches, guys, that have been successful as head coaches, guys, many times. Now, see, the problem for Carmelo Anthony and for a lot of these players, these more recent players, and why I tell you, these guys don't know the history of the game, the Gilbert Arenas, the J.J. Redicks, the Kendrick Perkins, a lot of these current NBA players that are retired now, right, are Carmelo Anthony. They don't know the history of the game. They know nothing about the NBA before 2010. They know nothing of the NBA before 2010. So in Carmelo Anthony's mind, he's only thinking about the current coaches. And yes, over the last 20 years or so, most of the coaches that have won titles have not been great ex-NBA players. A lot of them never even played in the NBA. Or they were just average role players, mediocre at best. Guys like Steve Kerr, right, have won championships. He was not a star player, right? He was a role player at best, right? We think about the 90s, Phil Jackson, Chicago Bulls. Phil Jackson was a role player in the Knicks. He wasn't a star player, right? Yes, so we get some of that. Absolutely. Greg Popovich, he wasn't a star player in the NBA. He didn't even play in the NBA. Right? So, yes, we get some of that. But once again, this is where they expose themselves. Because if you go into the history of the NBA, there have been many, many, many great players that have become successful head coaches. As a matter of fact, there are guys who are inducted into the Hall of Fame as players and coaches. So Carmelo Anthony sounds stupid right there when he says that. How can you not be a great player and be successful when you're inducted in the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach? That means that you are pretty damn successful as a coach. But Carmelo Anthony wants you to believe that there's never been any great player that's went to the sidelines and been successful. He said those are his words, not mine. So let's expose this clown Carmelo Anthony right now. Remember, just off the top of my head, some guys I thought of that I know won championships or were good coaches. Let's think about K.C. Jones, coached the Boston Celtics to 2 titles, 1984, 1986. K.C. Jones is inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player, right? So obviously K.C. Jones was pretty damn successful as a coach. He's a Hall of Fame player, right? Played for the Boston Celtics for all those years in the 60s, right? And then he became the coach of the Boston Celtics in the 80s and coached in two titles, 84 and 86. So that's pretty damn successful. As a head coach, I would think K.C. Jones. So right there, Carmelo Anthony gets proven wrong. He was a star player, a Hall of Fame player, and he was pretty successful as a coach. K.C. Jones. Carmelo Anthony probably has no idea who K.C. Jones is. But whatever. How about Billy Cunningham? Does anybody know who Billy Cunningham is? I bet you Carmelo Anthony doesn't know who Billy Cunningham is. Billy Cunningham, I believe, was I'm trying to think how many All-Star games he made. Several All-Star games. I believe it was MVP in the ABA. Like, just a Hall of Fame player. He's in the Hall of Fame as a player, guys. He coached the 1983 Sixers to the championship. So that's pretty successful. He won a championship as a head coach, and he's a Hall of Fame player. So he was a star player. He went and coached for some years, and he won a title. That's successful to me, right? That's having some success. You coached a team to an NBA title. Okay. Billy Cunningham. Carmelo Anthony won't mention Billy Cunningham during that interview. Nope. How about Bill Sharman? Does anybody know who Bill Sharman is? Played for the 60s Celtics, right? He's a Hall of Fame player and a Hall of Fame coach. Bill Sharman, inducted into the Hall of Fame as both player and coach. I believe he coached the 1972 Lakers to the title. All right, so he was a coach of the Lakers in the early 70s. Coached them to the 1972 title. He's inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach. Bill Sharman, right? But does Carmelo Anthony talk about him or mention him? No, he was a great player that was successful as a coach. How about Larry Costello? Does anybody remember Larry Costello? Now, he's not a Hall of Fame player or a Hall of Fame coach, but the man was a pretty good player. The 6-time All-Star, Larry Costello. So obviously he was a pretty good player, and he was a pretty decent coach, Larry Costello. So shout out to him. How about Tommy Heinsohn. You guys know Tommy Heinsohn. Played with Bill Sharman, Bill Russell, Bob Cousy, Sam Jones on those Celtics teams. Tommy Heinsohn, he coached the Celtics to the title, excuse me, what was that? 74 in 1976, I believe the Celtics won the title in the 70s. Bill Sharman was the head coach of that team. He's inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach. Tommy Heinsohn. So once again, just another guy who's inducted as a player and a coach. Same thing as a Bill Sharman, guys. How about Lenny Wilkens? I wrote down Lenny Wilkens here. You guys know who Lenny Wilkens is? Carmelo Anthony probably doesn't know who Lenny Wilkens is. I grew up watching Lenny Wilkens as a coach. He played way before my time. He played with Bob Pettit on the Hawks, right? The St. Louis Hawks back in the 60s. That was Lenny Wilkens. He's a Hall of Fame point guard. He's a Hall of Fame point guard. One of the great point guards in the history of the NBA, Lenny Wilkens. So obviously he was a great player, and he's a Hall of Fame coach. Inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach, Lenny Wilkens. He coached the 1979 Seattle Supersonics to their only title. The only title in Seattle Supersonics history was coached by Lenny Wilkens. Lenny Wilkens, but Carmelo Anthony won't talk about Lenny Wilkens as a great player and was successful as a coach. He won't mention him, though. Shout out to Lenny Wilkens that no one really talks about. When I was young growing up, I remember Lenny Wilkens coaching the Atlanta Hawks. If I remember correctly, the Atlanta Hawks and the Cleveland Cavaliers, I believe he coached during the 80s and the 90s. So shout out to Lenny Wilkens, man. Like I said, Lenny Wilkens was the coach of the Cavaliers when Michael Jordan hit the shot in 1989. Lenny Wilkens was coaching that team. So shout out to Lenny Wilkens. Like I said, a great player and a great coach. Hall of Fame in both regards, man. So once again, shout out to him, man. Carmelo Anthony won't talk about him, though. How about Larry Bird? Larry Bird was a pretty damn good coach. He only coached for a couple of seasons, but you guys remember he coached the Indiana Pacers in the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals against Michael Jordan's Bulls, pushed him to 7 games. Larry Bird was coaching that team, guys. Right? Larry Bird was also an executive. I believe he won Executive of the Year. I believe he won Coach of the Year. But he also coached the Indiana Pacers to the NBA Finals in 2000. That was Larry Bird. So that's pretty successful. And we all know Larry Bird is one of the greatest players of all time. So he obviously was a great player, and he was pretty damn successful as a head coach. Larry Bird, once again, proving his high IQ and showing that he knows the game. He can coach players. So Larry Bird showing Carmelo Anthony right there that, yes, you could be a great player and be successful as a head coach. No, Larry Bird didn't coach for 10, 20 seasons, but the man was successful when he was on the sidelines. He was. So shout out to Larry Bird. But Carmelo Anthony won't mention Larry Bird. How about Jason Kidd recently? He's in the NBA Finals right now, coaching the Dallas Mavericks. Jason Kidd's one of the great point guards of all time, one of the great players of all time. So obviously he was a great player, and he's been a pretty decently successful coach. They should never got rid of him in Milwaukee. Who knows how many times he could have won in Milwaukee now with all those years there, developing these guys. But they didn't like Jason Kidd and the old school mentality he had. But he's been pretty successful going to an NBA Finals already, right? On the Dallas Mavericks. Not bad for Jason Kidd. Like I say, he deserves a lot of credit for his coaching job there. And how about Bill Russell, man? Like Carmelo Anthony didn't even mention Bill Russell. Once again, these guys do not know the history of the game. Bill Russell, I believe, coached the Boston Celtics for 3 seasons. I believe it was 3 years. He was a player coach. A player coach. Now, obviously, Bill Russell is one of the great, great players in the history of the NBA. And he was a pretty damn good player coach, too. He was a player and a coach. He coached them to the 1969 championship. Bill Russell. So, once again, Bill Russell, 3 seasons, I believe he coached, and I believe he won 2 titles, 68 and 69. Right? I believe they lost in 67 to Will Chamberlain Sixers. And I believe they won in 68 and 69, if I remember correctly, guys. But he coached for 3 seasons. Bill Russell won 2 titles. That's pretty damn successful to be a player coach. The only person that I can think of in the history of the NBA to be an active player and coach at the same time and win. So Bill Russell right there exposing Carmelo Anthony. But Carmelo Anthony will say that there's never been any star player that's went to the coaching sideline and been successful. That was his statement. I'm telling you, man, these guys are clueless about the NBA's history. There have been many great players that have become great coaches. Like I mentioned, there are guys inducted into the Hall of Fame as players and coaches. Lenny Wilkens, Bill Sharman, Tommy Heinsohn. So it exposes this notion that you have to, or that you can be a great player and be a great coach. Now, are all great players great coaches? Absolutely not. Like I mentioned, over the last 20, 25 years or so, most of the coaches that have been successful, the Phil Jacksons, the Greg Popovich, the Steve Kerrs, they were not star players. They were not, some of them, like a Greg Popovich, was never even in the NBA. So yes, you don't have to be a star player to be a great coach. We think about Pat Riley, the Chuck Daly's, right? They're great coaches, but they were not great NBA players. Pat Riley was a decent player. I don't even think Chuck Daly even played in the NBA. But they were great players. Red Auerbach, Red Holtzman, right? Some of the great coaches in the history of the NBA. You don't have to be a great player or even play in the NBA. But for Carmelo Anthony to say that great players never become successful coaches, to just make that blanket statement and not put any shine on these guys and not say, yo, these guys have been great, but more often than not, it's the average players or the guys who never played in the NBA who become the great coaches. That's true. But to say that there's never been a great player that's been successful as a coach, you sound like an idiot, man. Once again, I must educate someone who played in the NBA for a long time. Exposing what I always tell you guys. Just because they're professional basketball players, they played in the NBA 10, 15 years, they made all this money, whatever the case may be, does not mean they know the history of the NBA. You don't have to know the history of the NBA to play in the NBA. Once again, a lot of these guys are only in the NBA because of their height, the size that they are, right? Not because of their heart, not because of their determination, none of this stuff. It's because they're 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", 6'7". Once again, I ask you guys out there, how often do you see a 6'9", 6'10", 7-foot person in your everyday life? How often? I never see anybody that tall. It's rare. So once again, these guys are blessed. They're blessed. They're not average people. So a lot of these guys don't play for the love of the game. They don't care about the NBA. They don't care about its history. They don't respect the history. So they don't care to know. And they just speak like a bunch of fools. And Carmelo Anthony sounds stupid when he makes it seem like, oh, no great players are ever great coaches. And then he puts himself out there and he mentions someone like a Magic Johnson. Yeah, Magic Johnson wasn't great as a head coach, but you're naming one guy. There have been plenty of guys who never played in the NBA that weren't great coaches. So Magic Johnson wasn't a great coach. Who cares? Carmelo Anthony's not on Magic Johnson's level. For Carmelo Anthony to bring up a Magic Johnson as not being a great coach as an example of what he was talking about, once again, you sound stupid. Because I just named off what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the top of my head, 9 guys I wrote down that were great players and they were successful coaches. 9. Off the top of my head. But Carmelo Anthony can't come up with any of these names. He couldn't think about Bill Russell. He couldn't think about any of these guys. Lenny Wilkins? Nope. Can't think about none of these guys as great players and coaches. Exposed. Larry Bird? Nah, he can't think about Larry Bird. None of these guys. He brings up Magic Johnson, right? One of the biggest stars that wasn't that great of a coach. He brings him up, one guy, to make it seem like no other player has been successful as a player and a coach. I named those 3 guys on this list that are inducted into the Hall of Fame as players and coaches. So that expose that idea right there. Carmelo Anthony can't be a coach because no one wants to listen to Carmelo Anthony. Because Carmelo Anthony never listened to anybody else during his career. He didn't play a lick of defense, Carmelo Anthony. The guy was a black hole. Once you gave him the ball, he was shooting it. The guy was a shot chucker, man. And yes, Carmelo Anthony had a nice stroke, man. A good shot. But that was it. He wasn't a great rebounder for his position. He wasn't a terrible rebounder, but he wasn't great. He was a terrible defensive player. Wasn't a great leader. Didn't have great playmaking ability. Wasn't a great athlete. Carmelo Anthony, man, to me was an underachiever. He could shoot the ball. That was where it ended. But Carmelo Anthony really believes that he's in another realm. Yeah, he's probably a top 50, top 75 player. No doubt about it. But he's nowhere near the top 10, 15, 20, 30 greatest players in NBA's history. Nowhere near that. For him to mention Magic Johnson like he's on Magic Johnson level, you're nowhere near Magic Johnson, Carmelo Anthony. Nowhere near him. Magic Johnson failing as a coach or an executive has no bearing on what Carmelo Anthony would do. Y'all ain't in the same level, the same class. But Carmelo Anthony thinks he is. It's a joke. And he exposed himself. These guys don't know the history of the NBA, guys. These are the facts. You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.